and fought it with an attorney, could never get my job back. And because I broke what's called the blue wall of silence with the police and the sheriff's office, could never get back into law enforcement in this country.
So I am, in fact, very humbled and honored to have my name associated with a Supreme Court decision that expanded the First Amendment rights here in Nevada and is being used for other journalists who participate in online journalism across the country.
Alex here, administrator of our Nevada Judges. We are here with Sam Toll, the editor of The Storyteller, and Doug Poppa of Truth and Consequences. We'll start with a round of introductions. First, why don't you, Sam Toll, let us know a little bit about you, your role, and I guess now it looks like you are having your own case covered by our Nevada Judges.
Yeah, Alex, thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be on the screen with you and Doug. So my name is Sam Toll. I'm a fifth generation Gold Hill native. I had a 30-year career in the Sacramento Valley in publishing and printing and returned home in 2016. In 2017, I started The Storyteller to provide factual information on a recall effort for our Storey County Sheriff and to provide an online digital news micro site for the folks in Storey County, which, for those of you who don't know, is 4,500 residents strong, teeny little county outside of Reno and Carson City that happens to house the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center, where Tesla set up their first gigafactory in 2014-15. My case, my news site gained notoriety because I was sued by the county commissioner for some biting coverage that I involved myself in using investigative techniques that I taught myself. So that's kind of the Storyteller's genesis in a nutshell.
We'll go a little bit more into that for sure. Now over to Doug Poppa. I really want you to emphasize your background. Started out as your role as a police officer, how that led to apparently some testimony that got an innocent man freed, and how that eventually evolved into what you do now, which is investigative journalism.
Sure. I got about 18 years combined in law enforcement with different agencies, a U.S. Army military police veteran, 20 years in the casino industry as an investigator, and then the last two jobs were director of security and surveillance at two properties, the last one being the Las Vegas Riviera that's now closed. I'm now, past couple of years, I've been working, well, I'm retired on Social Security, but I'm an independent investigative journalist. I wrote several hundred stories, 5 years with the Baltimore Post-Examiner as an online media outlet. Did 165 plus stories on the Las Vegas massacre, more than any journalist in the country.
But first, we are getting new insight tonight into that chilling body camera video from the 1 October shooting.
Well, we see the moments officers storm the shooter's room, and 13 Action News reporter Tom George right now. Now, he spoke with an expert about what they did right in that very tense situation.
The experts do say that they handled this calmly and professionally as they went into the gunman's room. That's the moment officers cleared the suite on the 32nd floor. Security expert Doug Poppa says the several-person strike force did a good job handling a tense situation professionally.
It was very chaotic that night. There was a lot of craziness going on. People were yelling over the radio. They didn't know where the shooter was coming from. When they hit that door, they didn't know if they were going to be facing one guy or 20 guys with assault weapons, and they would have been dead. You go in. I mean, that's what you do. You don't wait in the hall. You don't wait outside. You go in. That's what they train to do. But that's something I'm sure they looked at on after incident briefings and debriefings and stuff like that.
Now, Poppa says, of course, he also wants to commend the officers who were on the ground at the festival that night, who he says saved lives.
Got involved with now former Judge Melanie Andrews Tobias and did the interview with her and the investigations after that. And then with the unsolved 2016 Las Vegas double homicide of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman. That will be 5 years unsolved in October this year. And that case is surrounded with allegations of police corruption, misconduct, negligence, So that's what I'm doing. In 1992, I lost a 12-year police career with the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. I was a criminal investigator, a detective, and I testified that the prosecutor and the sheriff's office, the captain, withheld exculpatory evidence in a guy that was in jail for over 4 years for the attempted murder of his wife. Testified at 2 trials. It was all over, was national news back in 1982. I was interviewed with 60 Minutes. They ended up putting it on the Street Stories with Ed Bradley, CBS News in 1992, Inside Edition, Current Affair, Washington Post. Everybody was in on it.
William Carter was facing 14 years behind bars for the attempted murder of his wife. But this lawman sacrificed his badge for justice.
Basically, my professional career is ruined in Loudoun County.
Today, the high price one cop is paying for telling the truth.
Bonnie Strauss reports that he spent years in prison until a cop sacrificed his job to get him out.
But William Carter's release carried a heavy price for this top Virginia cop. He sacrificed his career in the name of justice for a man he didn't even know.
I think, yeah, basically my professional career is ruined in Loudoun County.
Electronics tycoon William Carter was convicted of attempted murder. What Carter and his private eye didn't know at the time was that a complete stranger, narcotics detective Doug Poppa, was wrestling with secret evidence that would blow his case wide open. When he read that William Carter was arrested, Poppa did what any top cop would do. He told the county prosecutor and assumed it was used in the trial. But after Carter was convicted, rumors spread through the sheriff's office that he had been railroaded. The whispers tormented Poppa.
I didn't know if my information had come out at the trial. Okay, I didn't know how much evidence they had against this guy. Maybe they didn't need my statement.
When Doug Poppa heard that, he decided he couldn't live with himself unless he spoke out. This time, he contacted the defense. But the court believed Doug Poppa. And on Valentine's Day, William Carter was released. But what about Doug Poppa, the cop who refused to keep quiet? Angry county officials gave him a suspension, then fired him for his contact with the media. We asked Sheriff John Isom if it wasn't retaliation.
I don't have any comment on it.
That's what bothers me about this whole thing. The message you're sending is, see, we did it, Doug. You don't come out, you don't buck the system. No matter what the reason is, you just can basically keep your mouth shut.
But Poppa did not keep his mouth shut. During the retrial this July, his testimony riveted the courtroom.
He stated to me, he says, I hate him so much I would shoot myself even if I died. I can make it look like he did it, so he would spend the rest of his life in jail and ruin the rest of his life.
We, the jury, on Keisha's joint, find the defendant, William Douglas Carter, not guilty.
As for the detective who sacrificed his career for justice, there is little reward. Mostly anger toward Sheriff Isom and Prosecutor Birch.
I was suspended for 10 days without pay, and I ended up being fired after 12 years in this department, okay? I'm mad, and I'm angry, and I'm going to be in Loudoun County. I'm going to be a thorn in their side until William Birch and John Isom are thrown the hell out of office.
Loudoun County was 35 miles west of Washington, D.C. I was fired in April of 1992 while the CBS News crew was up there filming the segment for the Street Stories with Ed Bradley, and fought it with an attorney, could never get my job back. And because I broke what's called the blue wall of silence with the police and the sheriff's office, could never get back into law enforcement in this country. And ended up coming out to Las Vegas in 1993 and worked at MGM for a couple of years as an investigator. And then I ran security and surveillance for 2 properties, the Silverton Hotel and Casino, and then finally the Las Vegas Riviera that's now gone. That's the new, I guess, for the Sands Convention Center is going to be part of what the property is now. So that's basically a nutshell. I started writing for the Baltimore Post-Examiner in 2015 and stayed with them for 5 years. It was a reader-supported paper, and started my podcast, which is my new forum for my investigative journalism, Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa. It's available on YouTube, Facebook, and then now on audio portions are on Spotify and Anchor. And that's my new forum for my investigative journalism. And so that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I left a couple of things out, but that's pretty much my history.
Well, yeah, we'll go back to a little bit more in a second, especially with regards to the impact of electronic coverage. But one of the things I was going to jump over to Sam Toll was, because I think that this is one of the big things that you had to deal with yourself, was Sam Toll, your case eventually led to a publication by the Supreme Court that had to do with expanding News Shield statute protections. And, you can go into the technical details as to what that means, but I believe, and I guess we'll talk to Doug Poppa about this in a moment, is that you had to deal with being confronted with the notion that you were not a journalist and that you didn't have journalistic protections, and that there was a possibility that you couldn't protect your sources. And what I mean by possibility is I believe you faced contempt of court, but I'll let you go ahead, take it away, go into the details of that, because I'm sure Doug Poppa will be especially interested in all of that you went through.
Yeah, so I am in fact very humbled and honored to have my name associated with a Supreme Court decision that expanded the First Amendment rights here in Nevada, and is being used for other journalists who participate in online journalism across the country. It's very interesting. I was sued, as I mentioned, by Storey County Commissioner Lance Gilman for defamation. He named about eight pieces that I wrote about his, things that he's done in the county. But my main focus was that, that he does not live in Storey County and is therefore unable to serve as a Storey County commissioner because statute requires that he live in the district that he represents. Through the course of the lawsuit, I was deposed, and the attorney in the deposition demanded that I reveal the sources, the unnamed sources that I referred to in my pieces, so that they could then be deposed and could be outed and face potential repercussion. All of the people who I spoke with did so in the condition of anonymity because they feared exactly that they feared reprisal, that they feared recrimination, and that they would not talk to me unless I promised them I would keep their source confidential. During the deposition, we refused to answer questions about those sources. I refused to identify who they were. And I told my attorney, I told the counsel for Mr. Gilman that I was prepared to go to jail before I would release that information to him. The process led to us filing a writ of mandamus with the Supreme Court, requesting that they hear my argument about the fact that I was qualified to enjoy protection of Nevada's very robust Reporter Shield law, which was written in the early 70s before the advent of the internet. And so through that process, it was determined that people like Doug and like you, Alex, while we don't work for a TV, a newspaper, or a radio station, we still are providing the essential fabric of our society, the discourse and the exchange of information and ideas in the public forum. And so it was very, the lawsuit was filed against me in 2017. Today, we had yet another chapter unfold in that lawsuit. It's been a very interesting process, but both Doug, you, Alex, and other reporters who are, journalists who conduct business in today's media landscape are now protected by the same rights and the same, Nevada Shield law and across the country, other Reporter Shield laws that traditional mainstream media are able to enjoy.
So before I go over to Doug Poppa, just one thing that I want to point out is that you mentioned you had to file a writ of mandamus and get Supreme Court intervention. That basically means you lost in the district court. Were you ordered by the district court judge to reveal your sources?
He was about to, yes. And in fact, just before we were set to have a hearing where where I actually paid for witnesses, professional witnesses, to validate my position and argue that I was in fact a journalist. And like 2 days before that hearing was to take place, the judge issued his ruling and said that I guess now that I remember it, he did in fact say that from a certain period of time, I was not protected by the Nevada Shield law, and that I would be forced to reveal my sources for conversations that I had before I joined the Nevada Press Association. I was about to have face that tenuous decision as to whether or not I was going to roll on my sources or keep my mouth shut and go to jail, and I was prepared to go to jail.
Yeah, so I recall that one they said you had to join a press association. I also recall the argument that you literally didn't print to paper or something like that. Want to go over to Doug Poppa? I mean, did you get insinuations, assertions? Did you have anxieties that you wouldn't be able to protect your sources for similar reasons as those that were leveled against Sam Toll? And feel free to go into that, because I believe you have some police sources, which are pretty important sources for your line of work.
Yeah, I mean, I had no problem with that, Alice, because for like I said, 5 years, my stories were being published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner, which is an online news media outlet, reader supported, published out. I mean, it's based in Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm working out here in Las Vegas. When I broke away and started my podcast in May of last year, I think now we're pretty close to our 60th episode. I continue with a lot of the investigations that I had started with the Baltimore Post-Examiner, and that was Judge Melanie Andrews Tobiasen, former Judge Tobiasen, the Land Kaufman murders, the unsolved murders of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman, and stories related to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and the Clark County District Attorney's Office. I've never gotten any flack from anybody because I worked many years undercover. I would never release a source. The only names that I ever talked about or mentioned to another investigator was people who gave me permission to use their name. And I would call them up before, somebody said, well, who told you this? I said, I can't release it, but let me call the person up and see what he says. And he says, yeah, I have no problem. And a lot of the flack came from what I saw, came from Dana Gentry from the Nevada Current. And she's very negative about me in a lot of the articles where she mentioned me, calling me a blogger. And I'm saying, well, you call me whatever you want. I got 40 plus years investigative experience. And like I said, over 350 stories for the Baltimore Post-Examiner, 165 stories I wrote for on the Las Vegas Massacre, more than any investigative journalist in the country. As a matter of fact, some of my early stories on the Las Vegas Massacre, and a lot of people don't know this, were actually used in court filings by some of the attorneys who filed some of the first lawsuits against the MGM for the victims of the Las Vegas, the Route 91, the Las Vegas Massacre. So, when she described me as a blogger, and I'm thinking, well, if I'm a blogger, then so are you, because her paper is an online, it's not a print paper, it's an online news media outlet, just like the Baltimore Post-Examiner. So, for whatever reason why she was doing that. But as far as the sources, I would never give up the source. The only way I would ever mention anyone's name, I think that came up, and she even wrote about it in the story, as I had mentioned when they were doing the investigation, the commission on Judge Tobias, and they had their investigator out here, and he wanted to talk to me, and I talked to him about nothing that was secret. Everything was already published. He asked me for one name of a police officer who introduced me to then Judge Melanie Tobias, and I said, well, I can't release his name unless I talk to him. And he says, I don't care, Doug, go ahead. And so that's what I did, but I would never release anybody's name, especially now with the podcast I got going on, especially the last podcast I did on Shane Valentine. But right before that, I did a 2-part podcast on Sheriff Joe Lombardo, who runs the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, his cover-up of negligence that led to the rape of a 12-year-old girl in 2019. So my information comes from police sources, both civilian and sworn. And when I was writing the stories about the MGM and the massacre and all that stuff, I also had sources within MGM Resorts International. And I was breaking one story after another. None of the stories I broke were ever picked up by any of the media out here. I was on Fox, Tucker Carlson a couple of times talking about some of the stuff like that. But the media out here just basically ignored everything that I was doing. And to get on that, across the country, people like Sam and myself, what we consider independent investigative journalists, because I don't work for it. I work for myself. Okay. And people want to send me money on PayPal. That's fine. I don't have an income from what I do. My income is from Social Security. Be that as it may, I don't have to answer to a news director and says, we don't want you doing this story. And that's the problem I have here with a lot of the news outlets out here. They report on what people say. They don't do a whole lot of in-depth investigation. And it appears to me they don't have a lot of police sources. I do. And that's why I do the stories I do. And I vet my sources. I know who they are. And I confirm with other independent sources on what they tell me before I write anything. So I don't write BS. And people say, well, you did this and you did all this stuff. And how do we know you? I said, listen, I don't have to do anything. I could stop doing my podcast tomorrow because doesn't sustain my life. I'm not getting income from it. And so that's what I do. But like Sam said, I would go to jail. I did that when I was a cop. They want to know who sometimes the judge would say something. And back then, I don't know what it's like today, but if the informant was not part of the crime, you don't have to release their name. Well, where did you get the information from? And I would never release the name. And most cops they would go to prison before they would do that. And that's upheld now, I think, years later and stuff. But Sam's case was, when I read about it, when you told me about it, that's a pretty significant case. Yeah. Nevada Supreme Court making that ruling that you don't have to work for a radio station or a television station. The mere fact that you are an investigative journalist working for yourself and you're publishing your stories and your investigative work online, not in print media or on television, and they're saying now we're covered by the Shield Law. That's pretty substantial. I mean, yeah. I think that was excellent work, Sam, on what you did. Excellent.
Yeah, it definitely boosted my confidence and the confidence of the sources that I have. As you know, my sources are within the judiciary itself and attorneys. So you can imagine they actually do read that stuff in detail to know if they can be protected. Going over to Sam, this is going to be a general question for Sam and more specific for Doug. Generally, because we only just started covering your case, Sam, what's your perspective on the electronic coverage that we provide of judicial proceedings, and I guess the impact you think it may have on the work that journalists are doing?
So it's very interesting, Alex. First, Doug, I just wanted to commend you for your work. It takes, I guess maybe some. I'm about to use some lusty language that I've been accused of. It takes some king size balls to do what you do, and I've been very, very much appreciative and respectful for the hard hitting work that you've done. When you take on the cops and you take on people who consider themselves, to conduct business under a different set of rules. It takes a lot of courage, and I get a lot of respect for what you've done. So for me, I look at what the impact of being able to, cast aside, as Doug, as you mentioned, the pejorative, hey, you're just a blogger, you're just sitting in your underwear in your mom's basement throwing smack. You're not a serious professional, and recognize that, in fact, the work that we do, kind of, Doug, as you alluded to, is not being done in today's media outlets. I read guys like Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, and they are guys who've done, Greenwald broke Snowden's story, and these are guys who now write about the fact that, the journalists today just, echo what, the New York Times reported, that the Washington Post reported, that the Wall Street Journal reported, that something happened without any effort or, doing anything but trying to get, tweet likes. And as you know, Doug, doing this investigative research takes a lot of time. There's no budget, you and I don't make any money on it, right? I mean, we're doing it because we're passionate about what we do. And Alex, back to your, original question, what it is, the impact that you're having in sure, it's a tiny little micro, area of journalism, and yet it is so vital to, something that is one of the most fundamental aspects of our Constitution and of the fabric of our country, and that is our judicial system. And to provide the insight that you provide in Nevada, to have a scorecard that is based upon facts and data, and is something that can be used to in a number of different ways and areas, is just spectacular. I think it's great, and it reflects what is possible in today's environment. If we look at I was just having this conversation with my dad like 10 minutes ago about how what we're seeing on Facebook and YouTube is the equivalent of what Orwell wrote about in 1984. It's the equivalent of what Bradbury wrote about in Fahrenheit 451. It's the equivalent of what we saw in THX 1138. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that movie or not, but the thought police telling you how to think, and filtering information that may or may not, that they believe is not relevant to the discourse of thought in the public square. And I think that more and more what we are doing is some of the most important work in journalism.
Over to Doug Poppa, and you can take the same general question, but also I wanted to ask specifically, because our coverage of the Commission on Judicial Discipline, specifically in the matter of Justice of the Peace Melanie Andrews Tobiasen, is our second most popular case. And it was contentious. I felt pressure from both sides, because our Nevada judges is both trying to support the judiciary and the public. And I wanted to know what you thought about that in the general and specific sense. And also, I've seen you use some of our coverage in your podcasts. So let us know a little bit about how our electronic coverage of judicial proceedings impacts your work.
I got to give you a hats off and a thumbs up, Alex, because our Nevada judges, and people know, they go on YouTube and find it. The work you do is absolutely outstanding, and it's needed. Okay, it's basically a watchdog group on the judiciary, and you do fantastic work. You put a lot of time and a lot of money into that, and like Sam said, we self-fund ourselves. Okay, when I, meeting people, gas money, documents in the court, whatever, that comes out of my only income right now is Social Security. I don't have a police retirement because I lost the 12-year police career back in 1992. Could never get back on a police department. So everything that we do, and I'm sure Sam, all our whatever we need to do our investigative work, whether it's traveling to talk to somebody or documents from the court, that comes out of my own pocket, and there's really no reimbursement for that. And I do it, just like Sam said, is because nobody else is doing it. And I was talking to an FBI agent, a retired FBI agent, the other day, and I said, listen, if the local media were doing what I'm doing, I probably wouldn't do it, but they don't. And your organization is just phenomenal on the amount of coverage that you do on the judges, and you put it out on YouTube is fantastic. Now going back to now former Judge Melanie Andrews Tobiasen, you're crucial, because back in December of 2019, when her and Judge Amy Cellini, who's still a judge, had the charges against them, basically hostile work environment and cussing employees and all those allegations, you covered that. And yes, I used excerpts from your coverage in my podcast. And I think prior, even when I was writing for the Baltimore Post-Examiner, we used some of the coverage too. We put links in the stories over there. But I look at it this way. First of all, my background, because of what happened to me, and that's why I get involved when I talk to a lot of these cops and these law enforcement people. They tell me these things that some of the people look at it and say, well, it's got to be BS, because a sheriff wouldn't cover something up, okay? It wouldn't happen. And I said, let me tell you something. And I'll say how I got involved with the Land Kaufman murders for the same reason. I said, listen, when I talk and I do my podcast now, I put the facts in of what people tell me. And then I give my opinion. And that's where people get upset with me. Like I said, listen, it's my podcast. I'm presenting the facts of what my investigation uncovered. Then I'm giving my opinion based on my experience, because I lived this. And I did a podcast, a short podcast, I think it's about 3 or 4 back, and it was about what happened to me. Okay. And I don't like talking about it because it's very disturbing to me. Even it's 30 years later, it's very troubling. But people have to understand, when people come up and say it's preposterous that a police chief or a sheriff would cover stuff up and get away with it for years, it doesn't happen. I says, I know it happened because it happened to me. And then not only that the cover up, but what they did to me when I started exposing, when I testified in court. It was like I was Detective of the Year in 1986. I had letters of commendation, nothing bad in my file. Within 2 weeks of me testifying in November 1991 in court that they withheld as exculpatory evidence, my file was about not even a half an inch, 12 years on the department. In a matter of 2 weeks, it went to the size of a phone book. Everything I was doing, crossing the street, everything they can find to document, to try to get rid of me, they did. It was retaliation. So I lived it. So I know those things happen. And when I got involved with Judge Tobiasen, I did the interview with her in May of 2018. I thought when that story was published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner, which is basically the transcript of her audio recording with me, which was on the record, no matter what she said, it was on the record, you could hear it was on the record. I thought that that would take off in the media out here. And that's one of the reasons why the Baltimore Post-Examiner editor early on started putting some of the audio clips of her actual interview with me into the story, because people online were making comments that Judge Tobiasen wouldn't say something like that. And you're making it up. I wasn't making anything up. And when I started my podcast in May of last year, I think it's episode number 39, I published the entire unedited audio interview with Judge Tobiasen from the time the dial tone rings to the time we hang up, unedited, and it's about a 2-hour interview. And that's all unedited in episode 39. The reason why I did it was, even when I started the podcast, people were saying she wouldn't have said that. You're making it up because you hate her. And I said, listen, I don't hate her. I don't love her. She did an interview with me, and then other people wanted me to interview them. And some of the people contradicted some of the stuff that she said. An investigative journalist, an investigator, that's what I have 40 years experience. You're not a mind reader. Somebody interviews with you and tells you something, then somebody else says, I want to give you my side. They have as much right as the person you first interviewed to get their story out. And there was a lot of contradictions between the people who talked. And the sad thing about Judge Tobiasen is a lot of the stuff that she said has been confirmed to be true to some extent, okay? But she also lied and gave false statements in the paperwork she filed with the commission. And she made a lot of statements that contradicted her own text messages to Connie Land, City Land's mother, and emails that she had with me. And I think that's where she started getting into trouble. Why she did it, I don't know. That's something she may talk about somewhere down the road. But getting back to what Sam said, we're filling, the best way to put it is this. We're filling the void that the mainstream media does not, cannot, or will not do. And that's what's sad. And just like Sam said, there are investigative journalists, independent journalists all over this country today that are breaking some really, really great stories. I mean, you can go on the internet and you can look at these stories. They don't work for a television station. They don't work for a print newspaper. They work for themselves. And they're breaking some really, really big stories. And it's phenomenal work that's going on. And our platform now to get this out is the digital media, YouTube, the links to Twitter and the stuff that we put on. So, it's Sam's thing that happened with him with this, the shield law that covers us now. Okay. That's what I want to say. I mean, nobody's forcing us to do what we do. We do it, like he said, because we have a passion for it and we want to get it out to the public. The public has a right to know, especially the stuff that I'm doing. that there's some dirty, crooked stuff going on in the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. I'm not making this stuff up. This is coming from police personnel to me, and nobody else will get it out. Why? I don't know, but I do. And, you know, and I get the hate mail, and I've been getting that for 3 or 4 or 5 years since I started the stories on the massacre. You know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I get a lot of the hate mail from those guys during the massacre saying, hey, you know, you debunked this and you debunked that. I said, listen, I'm not debunking anything. I'm doing my investigations based on what the people were talking to me. And that's the same thing I do now. I don't have to make stuff up because I don't, like I said before, I don't have to do anything. I could stop tomorrow and not do another podcast, but I do it because I don't, you know, it annoys me because there's something wrong with the media out here in Las Vegas. And the best way I could put this is, I was talking to a gentleman from California a couple of months ago, and he said that one of his kids graduated from a college out in California and had a degree in journalism. And they said, what are you going to do? And he said, well, my dad lives in Las Vegas. And you know what they told him at the college? You do not want to work for a media outlet in Las Vegas because it's a controlled media environment. And he said, what are you talking about? And this is coming from a college professor to his students in California, that the media in Las Vegas are controlled by the casino industry and by the police department. And that's something that I've heard out here for years, even before I started writing, even when I was a director of security at the Riviera. I used to hear that all the time, and I've seen it for myself because they should be doing a lot of the stories that I'm doing. And they don't. And whether it's because people don't talk to them or they don't want to. I was actually told by a reporter who's not here anymore in Vegas that during the massacre, he said, we wish we can write the stories that you write. And I was writing for the Baltimore Post-Examiner. And I said, well, why can't you? Because they would never let us. And I'm not going to mention the outlet he's from. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we could never do the stories you do because you attack the police department and you were attacking the casino. And it wasn't attacking, it was just printing the truth of what the investigation came from. But he said, we would never be allowed to do that. And that's pretty sad. I mean, that's the state we are in here in Las Vegas. That's where we're at right now.
I like how you mentioned the fact that the social media, specifically YouTube, gives us an opportunity to actually do what we do, an opportunity we wouldn't otherwise have. I was going to mention that in closing. I really appreciate you guys coming on for this perspectives video. A lot of our viewers love to watch the hearing videos, but they don't often get to see the people behind what's going on in those videos. And you were very much involved in our coverage of the discipline of justice of the peace, Melanie Andrews Tobias. And I think it's great that you're giving them an opportunity to see you. If you guys want to subscribe, you can go to Doug Poppa's channel. It's Truth and Consequences. And then Sam Toll, he has a Twitter account, Storyteller. Thank you as well for coming on. Of course, you've completely altered the landscape with your publication. And of course, now we're going into electronic coverage of your case. So our viewers are going to get to see some more of what you're going through as well. As a round of goodbyes, I guess, we'll start with you, Sam.
Well, I just wanted to reiterate, Doug, what you had said, in terms of investigative journalism being, for all intents and purposes, dead. Guys, as I mentioned earlier, Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, they have moved from, Taibbi used to work for the Rolling Stone. He is now on Substack. Glenn Greenwald started The Intercept and left for Substack, specifically because he was told, as your journalist colleague told you, that he could not cover what he was wanting to cover and could not follow the stories where they led him. And it speaks volumes for, the sorry state of affairs in mainstream media, and speaks directly to what you and I do in a micro level, what they're doing in a national level. And of course, Alex, forgive me for not including you as well, because your work is spectacular and just as critical as anyone else's. But I just wanted to thank you for what you do, Doug, for what you do, and continue to encourage us to find the courage to continue to persevere, because as you said, Doug, you know what? I get accused all the time of making stuff up. Oh, you're just making that up. You these unnamed sources. You're a liar, and it's very frustrating. But hey, you know what? It's part of the job. Deal with it, guys. If you don't like what I'm writing, start your own blog and go for it.
And
That's
then
right.
you go ahead, Doug.
No, Sam, you have to be applauded for your perseverance in getting that Supreme Court decision, because that's an unbelievable decision. I didn't know about it until Alex was telling me about it the end of last year or a couple of months ago, and that is phenomenal that the Nevada Supreme Court ruled that you don't have to work for a radio station or television station. You can be independent investigative journalist and publish your stuff online, and you're protected by the Shield Law. And that was a phenomenal case. And applaud, thumbs up, and great job on that. And the same thing with you, Alex. Like I said, you're our Nevada judges. I told you, I think in some conversations we had, but I get emails from people when I put some of those excerpts in my podcast and stuff, and they're like, "Wow, who recorded that? What is this our Nevada judges?" And they say, "We wish we had a group like that out here in our state," because, they said, "How did you get the coverage of the judge testifying, when you use the excerpts when she said about the," and that's another thing. Okay. And I'm not going to mention the name of the reporters because they know who they are. Mm-hmm. But in 2019, when Judge Tobiasen and Judge Cellini were testifying out at the Boyd School of Law at the hearing during the commission, the Judicial Commission, for 2 days, there was 3 journalists in that hearing, myself and 2 others from Las Vegas, okay? And when Judge Tobiasen, when Mr. Bradley asked the judge, which was unexpected even to me, when he said, "Did you give an interview to the Baltimore Post-Examiner in 2018?" Okay? And she basically admitted that she gave the interview, okay? And she's talking about, making the statement to Shane Valentine's attorney and everything. When I did my story on it, I put that in my story. And the 2 other journalists that was sitting there for 2 days, that was completely eliminated from their story. And people were telling me, how come it's not in the blank newspaper, and how it's not on this? How come they left that out? And I said, that's something you have to talk to them about. Now, I heard they left them out because they were friendly towards the judge. They didn't want to make her look bad, but I don't know what the reason was. But that was a pretty substantial part of her testimony, is that interview that she gave me that was brought up by Bradley, Mr. Bradley, who was the prosecutor. And they completely eliminated anything about the Baltimore Post-Examiner interview in their stories. That was like unbelievable to me. Even people who read my story and said, "Wow, there's nothing in the Vegas media about that. How come only the Baltimore Post-Examiner?" And I said, "Well, you have to call them up and ask them why they did what they did." But, I look at it this way, and I just say it again, okay? I told somebody the other day, without getting any more information from anybody, I could literally sit down and write a story every day for the next year with the information that I have from talking to people for months and years in Las Vegas. And it's just a matter of getting it out. I do like once a week. I got to do, maybe pull up the pace on it. But, I'm in no rush because, like I said, nobody's paying me to do this. I do it when I want to sit down and make sure I do it right, and then I get it out. But I always, and that's the emails that I get from people, how come the Las Vegas media does not pick up on some of these stories? And I know a lot of times news outlets will not want to do a story, even though a lot of them do, on what another journalist says, because they can't confirm his sources. But going back to Judge Tobiasen, okay, I released that entire audio interview with her. And when I was writing for the Baltimore Post-Examiner, they put the links in, the audio links of some of her comments, specifically when she was talking about the Land-Kaufman murders, because people listen to this. Judge Tobiasen made some very serious allegations against the police department involving the unsolved 2016 Land-Kaufman double homicide, that the police had all the evidence that showed 3 people did the murders, that there was a cover-up in the case, and the police probably destroyed evidence. Now, when I published episode 39, that's out there for all these journalists out there to listen to. And they don't think it's important that a then sitting judge made those comments to a journalist, that there was a cover-up in the Land Kaufman murders and other stuff that she said. And some of the stuff Judge Tobiasen said about giving information to the vice detectives that was never followed up on, that led to the murder over the top-notch unlicensed club. That was confirmed by Sheriff Lombardo when he spoke to the commission's investigator. That's in public documents that I published. So she wasn't lying about that. We know she wasn't lying when she told me that she had gone to the FBI because she was asking for help. And the FBI agent, Kevin White, admitted that to Adam Wignansky, the investigator for the commission, when he interviewed her. Now, he wouldn't get into exactly what she said, but she wasn't lying to me when she said she went to the FBI. Where Judge Tobiasen, in my opinion, got herself involved in a lot of trouble is when she tried to, for whatever reason, when she was making responses to the commission in writing. And she put a lot of stuff in there that were all out lies. And I published it. And I said that. She lied. And she was getting herself into trouble. Why? I don't know. She made statements that, she couldn't figure out how Connie Land would know this because she never told her. When I have text messages that Connie Land gave me that dispute what Judge Tobiasen said about that. So, that stuff was out there. But when you have I look at it this way, and I use the word reporter, and then I use investigative journalist. Here's what a reporter would do. And this happened. You're sitting in a news conference, and a police officer says, they say, well, why did you say that in your search warrant during the massacre investigation that the entry team observed Paddock commit suicide when they made entry into the room? And all that stuff came out. I was the first one to write about that when they released the documents by court order that Sheriff Lombardo, by the way, never wanted to come out. And we saw the search warrant, and I did a story on it. The title of the story was, Police Observed Paddock Commit Suicide, because the sergeant who did the telephonic search warrant with the judge put in his affidavit under oath that when the entry team made entry into Paddock's suite, they observed him commit suicide. Now, nobody knew about that because all that stuff was hidden from the public until the newspapers and I think a TV station fought it to get those documents released. But then they had the press conference because when they asked Sheriff Lombardo about it, he said, I have no comment. You have to talk to the sergeant. So the sergeant held a press conference, and I wasn't allowed to go because they wouldn't allow me to go into the press conferences because they wouldn't give me credentials to go in there. So they reported that he said something, and I did a story on this, that, you have to understand how hectic it was that night. And the reporters basically just took that and put that in a story. And I did my story on that. And I said, that was ridiculous. Like, wait a minute. The worst mass shooting in modern American history, the largest homicide investigation in the history of the Las Vegas Police Department, and a Las Vegas Metro sergeant told a judge under oath to get the telephonic search warrant in his affidavit over the phone that the entry team police officers observed Paddock commit suicide. Then when they press him on it, he says, oh, no, nobody observed him commit suicide. But you have to take in consideration, I'm taking out of context, what he said, that because everything was hectic that night. And the reporters just accepted that and walked away. And I said in my story, that is absolutely BS, because I did hundreds of search warrants when I was a cop, okay? I was a criminal investigator, worked with narcotics for years. And you make sure that the information you're getting is based on fact, not hearsay. Because if I was one of those reporters at that press conference, I would have said, wait a minute, who were the cops that told you that they observed Paddock commit suicide? Okay? He wouldn't be able to answer because no cop told him that. And I'm just using that as an example how reporters report on what they say, but they don't investigate it any further and ask the hard questions. And that's what's sad out here. And that's why as long as I get information that I can verify, I will continue to do the podcast that I do because it needs to come out. It needs to come out because the public needs to know what's going on in their police department and in their district attorney's office. And that's why I do what I do, because people talk to me because they want it to come out, because they have no other outlet to get to. And I think that's pretty sad when you have 4 or 5 television stations in Las Vegas, 2 or 3 newspapers, and these people that are coming to me because they know if they went to them, nothing would ever get done. And it's like Sam said, we do what we do because we want to get it out into the public forum, because that's what the First Amendment's about, is getting it out to the public and let the public make their decision.
I can see you're getting a lot of subscribers in the future. It's not just because of what you're covering, but also because of your unique background. I wouldn't be surprised if you're the only YouTuber with that background. Again, guys, thanks for coming on, and we'll see you guys next time.